think maybe about 5 minutes, but let's start today. We will first start Amy's talk with a young student named Evan Beech. Evan has sort of, I guess, been doing this impersonation of Gerrit Smith for some time, and I think he is a befitting introduction to Amy's talk. So let's give a hand to Evan Beech.
Hello, I am Gerrit Smith. I was born in Old Fort Schuyler, New York, what is now Utica. My father's name was Peter Smith. He started out as a fur trader. He was good at making a deal. He learned the Oneida language for trading with them. My older brother's middle name was even Shenandoah, named after the Oneida chief Shenandoah. My father used his connections with the tribe to try and get their land. Eventually, New York State bought their land, then resold most of it to my father. This deal was, and still is to this day, disputed by the Oneida people. Peterborough was a town near the center of a 50,000-acre tract of land my father owned. Peterborough got its name from my father, Peter Smith. He moved my family there when I was 9. To build our house and his office building, he bought about 4 slaves. I watched the slaves work on the house and building. Then, when they were done, my father sold them. The whole thing affected me. How could he buy people, work them like that, and then sell them like they were objects? I wish he could have talked about it with me, but he never did that sort of thing. I thought he was a stingy, selfish man. He never even tried to connect with me or my brothers or sister. In 1814, I went to Hamilton College and was relieved to get away from my father. My mother and I were close, though. I wrote lots of letters to her when I was in college. I didn't write to my father at all. I was 21 when I returned home from college on August 26, 1818. The day after that, my mother died. I was heartbroken. My father was devastated. After she died, he just wanted to leave his land business behind. He sold his lands to me for $225,000, which would amount to about $8 million today. He made me responsible for selling the land and splitting the money from the sale evenly among myself, my 2 brothers, and my sister. He also put me in charge of his awful land trading business. My dream of continuing my education and becoming an attorney was shattered. I suddenly owned over 500,000 acres and was one of the largest landowners in New York State. I don't think anyone should own that much land. I married my college sweetheart, Weltha. I was a happily married man and moved out of my father's mansion in Peterborough. But just 7 months later, my new wife suddenly died. I felt so depressed and hopeless, like there was nothing for me in this world, so I did not do much. After my mom's and wife's death, I could not deal with regular life. I moved back to Peterborough. I remarried a few years later. Anne wanted me to become more Christian in my ways and to dedicate myself to a just cause. I went to church like Anne wanted me to, and I thought about what I considered to be a just cause. I remember when I was 9 and watched the slaves build our house and my father's office, only to be sold like objects after they'd built them. Then, in 1835, I was at an anti-slavery meeting in Utica when I was disrupted by a violent mob of anti-abolitionists. From then on, I dedicated my life to abolishing slavery. I firmly believe that all humans, no matter their skin color or gender, should have equal rights under the law. I established the Free Church of Peterborough that combined the political pursuit of abolition with Christian principles. I also financially supported many colleges and universities, but only if they offered education to black people. My first cousin, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, was working on getting women the right to vote by being a leader in the women's suffrage movement. I supported her efforts, but the question was, how could I best work to elevate the poorest of the poor and the most deeply wronged class of citizens? That's when I had the idea to give them land. Without owning land, they could not have a base on which to build lives for themselves and their children. Abolish slavery tomorrow, I said, and the land monopoly would pave the way for its reestablishment, since white males essentially controlled the land. So on August 1st, 1846, I announced that I would give plots of about 40 acres to 3,000 black men. In 1848, my friend Frederick Douglass cheered for my plan. He was one of the men to whom I gave a plot of land. I also helped fund his newspaper. I strongly believed that farming is a great equalizer, and even owning a small farm lot meant independence. I thought that once white people could see colonies of black people with thriving farms, why, it could destroy prejudice. I was a candidate for President of the United States in 1848, too. I also ran for president in 1856 and 1860. But my beliefs about the need to abolish slavery were too well known, and it wasn't popular. I served in Congress representing Madison and Oswego counties in New York in 1853 and 1854. But I quickly saw that I could achieve nothing of substance there. I could see that my efforts at social reform would have more of an impact outside government service. A man named John Brown came to me, asking if he could live close to some of the lots where black families had settled so he could help teach them to clear and farm the land effectively. I sold him lot 95, which was this 240-acre farm. He and his family moved here in August 1855, after which it was known as the John Brown Farm. John Brown was the first person to refer to the community of black-owned farms around North Elba as Timbuktu, after the medieval site of fabled African wealth, learning, and beauty in Mali. Except he spelled it with an O at the end instead of a U. It's funny how that pet name that they somewhat jokingly gave the place became the name that's lasted over so many years. John Brown had radical ideas on how to approach the abolition of slavery. I financially supported John Brown's efforts to protect abolition efforts in Kansas. I also funded his last, the raid on the Federal Armory in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, what is now West Virginia. That got him sentenced to death. My part in it started to be scrutinized. It seemed like my world was crumbling around me and there was nothing I could do about it. My plan to give 3,000 black men land did not work as well as I hoped. My friend Frederick Douglass pointed out that most of the black men that I'd given land to had sold it. He said that black men did not want to leave the city and their family and friends to try and farm in the wilderness. I hoped giving land would eventually help allow black men to vote. But 1 acre of this land sold for about $1, so 40 acres would not give black men the $250 of land they needed to be allowed to vote in New York. It would only give them about $40 of land. White men did not need to own land to vote. The system was so unjust. Some black men who got some of the parcels of land were successful at farming, but not many. Then the Civil War broke out, not long after John Brown's body came back to his farm in North Elba. It was the only way to rid our country of that disease called slavery. John Brown had convinced me of that. After it was over, I knew the North needed to forgive the South. We needed to come together again as a country, without the disease of slavery. But it would not be easy. I went so far as to contribute $225,000 to help free the jailed Jefferson Davis, who had proclaimed himself as the President of the South during the Civil War. Now, as I sit here almost 200 years later, black men and women may look like they have equal rights under the law, but discrimination and inequitable treatment is still a problem. We must come together to help elevate each other if this country is to live up to the social reform I envisioned.